For me personally, South Phoenix is one of those areas that is very special and then also a mystery to me in a lot of respects. As I said, I'm not a Phoenix native, but also at the same time, there's so much rich Black and African American and BIPOC history just in general in South Phoenix. So I'm really excited to be able to have Arturo and Summer here to talk about the project that Summer has been working on for a really long time, but just in general, the work that they both are doing in South Phoenix and the community of South Phoenix and how much we really need to be focusing in on that particular history because it's really, really, really important. So I'll go ahead and have, if we're ready, I'll have Arturo and Summer introduce themselves and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Hello, my name is Arturo, and I'm currently a graduate student here at ASU, and my major is in history.
Hello, I am Summer Cherland. I am the history professor at South Mountain Community College and the co-founder with 12 students of the South Phoenix Oral History Project.
Jessica Salow, Assistant Archivist, Black Collections here at Arizona State University Library Tempe campus, and I will be the moderator for this panel.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to try to do this sitting down. So my name, as I mentioned, is Arturo Perez Lopez, and I just want to give a brief thank you to everyone for making time out of their busy schedule to come here and support the symposium, and also to the organizers. The title of my presentation is South Phoenix, a Different Portrayal. And just a brief background as to what got me interested in this. Last year, I was fortunate enough to help in the permanent exhibit that's being displayed here at Durham Hall, that helped to commemorate the 60th year anniversary of the Dr. MLK Jr.'s visit to ASU. And through that, me and 200 graduate assistants were able to interview Senior Pastor Dr. Warren H. Stewart Sr. from First Institutional Baptist Church. So that's located on 12th Street in Jefferson. And he just introduced us to this rich legacy of civil rights activism here in Phoenix. And I did a little more digging, found Dr. Cherland's article, and here I am focusing on South Phoenix.
Just a real quick thing. Arturo changed his entire the study of things because of this project. So I just want to thank Arturo for his work on that particular project. And just in general, I'm so happy that you were able to find this project and be very dedicated and interested in this particular work.
Okay, so this project employs oral histories to recover and historicize local narratives, empowering the community to reclaim Black spaces in Arizona, while challenging the negative portrayals of South Phoenix perpetuated by local news outlets. So it's through these three narratives of Bill Smith, Darnell Sells, and Jake Sells that I wanted to assess the legacy of the civil rights legacy here in Phoenix, and also help to dismantle like negative stereotypes of South Phoenix. If you see to your right, I just did a screenshot, so a quick Google search of South Phoenix, and here are a couple of the results. This was on Monday. It states here, deadly double shooting in South Phoenix, man dead, woman hurt in South Phoenix, double shooting. So these are these negative portrayals that are being made of South Phoenix, and it's also through these oral histories that I want to, it's a collaborative effort, so helping to dismantle that barrier between the institutions and the communities that we're supposed to serve, so to help create these oral history archives to preserve these oral histories. And furthermore, I want to expand the historiography of the civil rights movement here in Phoenix. And historiography is just a fancy word as historians use. It's just the history of history, what scholars have said about a topic, in this case, South Phoenix or Phoenix in general. Just a very quick overview of the historiography of Phoenix or the history. So there was this notion of Sunbelt apartheid. So as early 20th century, there was racial covenants that prevented Black, brown, and Asian folks from living north of Van Buren Street. And this helped, or not helped, but this forcefully created what South Phoenix is and what South Phoenix is. Dr. Cherland will talk about this in a couple of minutes. And from the 1950s to 1965, these triumvirate of leaders, so it's the Ragsdale family, Eleanor, Lincoln, and Dr. George Brooks Sr. So they helped to dismantle these discriminatory policies, especially in housing, public education, and the workforce. Okay, so my first narrator, Bill Smith. The title is very important. South Mountain, not South Mountain Village. So all three narrators were aware of this or are aware of the impending gentrification that's going on in South Phoenix. And part of this beautification process, which is a word that one of my narrators used, is changing the name to South Mountain Village. So making it palatable for whom? Let that digest. We'll figure that out by the end of this presentation for whom. And one of the things Bill Smith said regarding the news outlets coverage is anything negative that happens, they always say it happened in South Phoenix. If something happens in Paradise Valley, in North Phoenix or West Phoenix or any other part of the valley, they just treat it as a story with its own reason, which is what we saw in the screenshot a couple of slides ago. And I argue that these negative portrayals have created a social stigma where the present obscures a rich past and the South, so South Phoenix, is condemned as a violent and troubled part of the city. Okay, so assessing the civil rights legacy. So Bill Smith talked to me about racial discrimination incidents that occurred, especially one he remembers vividly as a freshman attending South Mountain High School. He sat down to have lunch with a couple of people that were sitting down. 3 seconds passed, 5 seconds passed. They just looked at him and got up and left. And he thought, oh, okay, maybe something's going on, but whatever. He went on to the next table and they also got up and left. So he sat down and started to think like, what's going on here? And in recalling this, he told me like, Arturo, like, I realized like they moved away because I'm Black. And it was just in awe, like hearing him say that, like, oh, wow, his facial expression told me a lot. And in another incident, at the El Rancho market. So it's a market that predominantly serves like Latino community, I would argue. So there was a person being checked out by the cashier and he got in line. Person behind them got in line as well. They finished, the cashier finished and he was up next. But the cashier looked at the guy behind Bill Smith and told him, hey, come in front. And Bill Smith asked the cashier, like, wait, what do you mean? Like I was next? He's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like, why aren't you serving me? And the cashier told him, looked him in the eyes and told him, you know why I'm not serving you. And this happened between 1950s to 1965. But despite that, despite these racial discrimination, he states that South Phoenix is one of the best places to grow up in. He remembers a Black middle class, judges, lawyers, doctors, and this radio station, KCAC. And regarding the importance of this radio station, he states it was a good resource to have because we had a voice, and having a voice and then having the ability to express things. And of course, they wouldn't just throw anything on there. You know, they had quality information, but it was good entertainment. More importantly, it was ours. And he also has this pride of coming from South Phoenix. He's a retired veteran. He also worked in the financial industry for a couple decades. And he states like, look what came out of South Phoenix. However, he's also aware of the impending gentrification, and he states, and so now with them still making such a big deal about South Phoenix, now they call it South Mountain Village because it's more palatable for them. It's still the same area. So again, let that marinate. For who? Who is it palatable for whom? Okay. And then there's Darnell Sells. He calls, well, after this presentation, it's no longer going to be a secret, but he calls it the best kept secret in the city, South Phoenix. And I also forgot to mention that these are all South Phoenix natives, Bill, Jake, and Darnell. The latter two are siblings. So he's also aware of the negative portrayals of South Phoenix, specifically regarding news outlets. And he states, he reiterates what Bill says. So, you know, the same thing can happen either in West or North Phoenix, but they will always mention that it was South Phoenix, almost like, don't go there. Be aware, this is where the trouble is. And he also, growing up, he had some instances of racial discrimination. The first one he recalled was driving, I believe, north of Washington Street. It was his older brother, his friend, and he was in the back. And they got pulled over. And the police officer started to ask him, like, where are you guys going? What's your guys' names? Whose car is this? And he recalls that his brother had some attitude. So he started to give him the business. He's like, what do you mean where we're going? Like, we're going to practice. And he started to get a little heated. Unfortunately, nothing happened. They were let go. But in recalling this incident, he said, like, of course, They pulled us over because there's 3 black kids driving a car north of Washington Street. In another incident, in his football game, they played against Paradise Valley High School. And their bus pulled over. There was no parking for them, so they had to park a couple blocks away. They had to walk to the stadium. Okay, fine. They started to warm up, and there was these what he called like professional looking adults with Oxford shirts on, red ties, yellow ties. And then they started to call them racial slurs, which he thought was very interesting, for lack of a better term. He never felt that his life was in danger, however, but that moment stood out to him. And in a funny, I think it's funny, maybe it's not, but they went back to the locker room and his white teammates were looking at him like, hey, what's going on? Like, he says they were tripping. Like, what do you mean what's going on? They're calling us the N-words. Like, yeah, what do you expect? Like, we're in Paradise Valley. And okay, so we saw that screenshot that states that, or yeah, is assuming that South Phoenix is synonymous with crime, or they're making it. However, within or talking to these 3 narrators, I found that that's not the biggest threat to South Phoenix. It seems to be that it's the impending gentrification, and they all mention the Valley Metro Light Rail, so the South Central extension. And he mentions how it's displacing local businesses and also residents that who grew up here. He gets a call, and he's tired of getting these calls of asking him if he's going to sell his house. And he knows eventually they're going to get the corridor, and he knows eventually they're going to get people out. However, he doesn't oppose this process, this beautification process, but he has this fitting idiom. He states, well, in order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, right? Well, we're always breaking the little man's eggs. And this beautification process is at the expense of locals. So there's these housing developments with fences around them, making it safe and attractive, again, but for whom? And my favorite interview is with Jake Sells, so his older brother, the one that has an attitude and gave the police officer the business. I started talking about civil rights, but he didn't want to talk about that. He wanted to talk about the Black and brown local businesses that he grew up going to in South Phoenix. And he just mentioned so many names, and these are just a couple: Mr. Garcia, Miss Jarvis, Mr. Chavez, Mr. Perez, Mr. Void, Mr. Rebels on the barber shop, Mr. Olivas on the fruit stand where all the kids went. There were farmers and always had fresh fruit and stuff. He could recall the exact location where these former businesses were at. So I asked them, how important do you think it is for a neighborhood to have local owned businesses, but also be acquainted with one another? Because he also emphasized this relationship between the Black and brown locals, like they helped one another, right? And he states, I think it's very important, if you know the hard work and the effort people put into making things available for your neighborhood, for you and your neighborhood, it gives you a sense of pride. And there's that word again, pride, to spend your money in your neighborhood. But when you have outside forces trying to make you seem like a person in your neighborhood is trying to get over on you, and you have to drive 20 miles more to save a dime, it doesn't make sense. And furthermore, he states, I think outside forces are destroying our neighborhoods that took pride in looking after each other. Eventually, we did get to the civil rights movement after like 2 hours. And I asked them, like, what issues did the civil rights movement not fully address or solve? And he states, I don't think it solved anything. There are still issues that are happening in South Phoenix and Phoenix in general that are affecting Black, brown, and Native communities. And he states, regarding the civil rights movement, it was always like, we'll address it next time. Next time. It's always the next time. But the issues never completely go away. You do a little bit to pacify people and you take your mind off, then you go to something else. But the bottom line issue is still there. And that resonated with the interview that I had with Pastor Stewart. He mentioned that there's issues going on affecting these communities of color, which were public education, healthcare, and affordable housing. So, in spite of the national efforts and the local efforts by the civil rights pioneers of Phoenix, 60 years later from the landmark decision, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, there are still economic and social issues that persist in the city of Phoenix, particularly in South Phoenix or the South Side, right? So it's through the use of these oral histories that I want to not only assess the civil rights legacy, but also create this oral history repository to preserve this rich legacy of the Mr. Garcia, Mr. Perez, and also challenge the negative portrayals of South Phoenix to one, as Darnell Sells called it, the best kept secret in the city, or as Bill Smith called it, one of the best areas to grow up in. Thank you.
Yay. I'm just gonna bring up Summer's slides here very quickly. Just give me 1 second.
Bill Smith went to South Mountain in like the 50s.
Yeah.
You might have known some of my narrators. All right, can you hear me? All right, I'll warn you, I'm a morning person. My poor students, 8 a.m. Monday morning. Here I come every time, so I'll warn you about that. All right. All right, let's see if this works. Yep, it works. All right, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here, and thank you to Arturo, who put our panel together and invited me. Phoenix is a multicultural place with a multiracial history, but 1960s boosters would have us believe that Phoenix was an Anglo utopia built and managed by whites for whites. To the contrary, Mexican founders and architects designed the first structures and taught white settlers the art of adobe. Prior to that, the prehistoric Hukugam farmed and irrigated the desert, leaving behind the canal system upon which Phoenix is built. And you likely know about the first African Americans who were here in 1868 when Mary Greene arrived with her family. And then you probably know about East Lake, founded in 1889 on Jefferson and 16th Street. It was called Phoenix Park, but it was later renamed East Lake in 1914, just as segregation was taking hold in Phoenix. And areas around the park became home to some of the most prominent Black businessmen and women and politicians in the area. So what happened? 3 events set racial segregation in motion, creating a Phoenix and a South Phoenix. 1, the city is founded. The township was founded in 1870. Main streets were now Center Street running north and south and Washington Street running east and west. 11 years later, a Phoenix is incorporated, and the first legislation includes measures for racial segregation. Then the railroad arrives. Kind of see it a little bit. 1886 and 87, 2 railroad lines are completed from Maricopa Wells to Phoenix. And just as soon as Mexican and native laborers finished laying those tracks, Phoenix officials designated the north side for whites and the south side for people of color. Municipal funding flowed north. And then finally, the Salt River floods. In 1892 and 93, and again in the 1910s, a series of 100-year floods forced those with means to higher ground further north and left behind the most vulnerable living in the floodplain between the tracks and the Salt River. And that's how East Lake becomes accessible to African Americans. So when you heard Arturo and I were going to talk to you about South Phoenix today, what did you think we meant? Did you think we meant South Phoenix, Washington Street and south, the tracks and south, or the Salt River and south? It's all debatable. I once interviewed a man named Gary Walters. Gary told me he was born and raised South Phoenix. We spent an hour recounting his childhood growing up on Magnolia Street in the 1960s and 70s. At the end of the interview, one of my students asked Gary the question we always ask, which is, where is South Phoenix? Where does it start and where does it end? Gary told us in no uncertain terms, South Phoenix is from the river to the mountain, 40th Street to 19th Avenue. There's just one problem. Magnolia Street, where Gary grew up, is a block north of the river. So by his own definition, Gary, born and raised Walters, didn't actually grow up there. But of course he did. Who am I to question Gary's history? This isn't gotcha journalism. This is local history. I saw Gary just a couple weeks ago, and I told him I tell this story every time I present because he demonstrates there's room for interpretation. Gary's racial and socioeconomic background gives him just as much claim to South Phoenix as his address did. There are 3 major physiographic barriers that have historically segregated the haves from the have-nots in urban and city planning. Do any of you know what they are? Sort of physical barriers, geographical barriers that separate people? I'll give you some hints with some pictures. Water, railroads, and highways. Very good. All 3. South Phoenix has all 3. Oops, let's go back. You know about the railroads. Okay, I already told you about those. They segregated races, and the city allowed for both industrial and residential development on the south side, setting in motion decades of pollution and fracturing disenfranchised communities. Southsiders built homes from found materials and tents. Outdoor privies were common. Sidewalks didn't exist. Buses and streetcars didn't come south of Jefferson. In the 1930s till the 1960s, researchers called this the worst slums west of the Mississippi. And then, of course, there's water, which I mentioned as well. Each time the Salt River flooded, things got better for whites and worse for blacks. Most African Americans and other minorities were consolidated to that industrial and vulnerable district between the river and the tracks. The river, though, also halted Phoenix annexations until the 1960s. See, Phoenix was small at first. They only began to expand north and west because of competition from nearby suburbs. And they avoided purposely annexing southward, in part because the Salt River was a liability, but also because, due to racism, growing communities of Mexican, Mexican-American, Asian-American, and African-American communities were forming and becoming very powerful on the south side. That means until 1969, most people living south of the Salt enjoyed a separation from Phoenix and lived in what was called the county. Some of the first Black residents of the county lived in Okemah, a homesteading community founded as early as the 1910s by Black cotton pickers who were recruited from Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas. Nelson Mitchell Sr., they called him Chief Okemah, and he was a Kickapoo man for whom the community is named. Nelson Mitchell Sr. moved to Okemah from Texas in 1943. He was not a young man. He was 55 years old, trying to start, for the first time, his own family farm. He borrowed money from his son. He bought 3.5 acres on 40th Street, north of Broadway. He had only a 4th grade education, but this man drew and executed the plans for the home himself. And when he was done, it was one of those most modern homes owned by an African-American in the community. It was slump block with a swamp cooler, a screened-in porch, gas heat, a stovetop, a shop, a functioning toilet, a garage. Groundwater came from a well for cooking, and SRP delivered irrigation. His home was surrounded by citrus groves, sweet peas, roses, lettuce, squash, corn, greens, and the like. He had a cow for milking, chickens and pigs for slaughtering, and quiet, breezy nights under mesquite, cottonwood, and pecan trees. Mitchell's address was Route 1, Box 426, Tempe, Arizona, even though Blacks were legally restricted from buying homes in Tempe until the 1970s. His son, Nelson Jr., moved to Okemah in the 1950s when he was stationed at Luke Air Force Base. He and his wife, Fanny, attended Willow Grove Church, named for the willow tree where worshipers used to congregate before there was a church on Miami Street. And baptisms took place in the canal just off of 40th Street and Transmission Road, today's University and 40th. Nelson Mitchell III, in the middle, right here, he was born in 1953. He and his siblings, Cynthia and Linwood, attended 40th Street School in Okemah. It was all Black because African-American students were segregated, even though some had Tempe addresses. That's because Tempe schools paid the Roosevelt School District $200 per pupil to take their Black kids off their hands. That's a lot of money in the 1950s. 40th Street School had no playground, no cafeteria, outdated books, broken desks, and a stern but devoted principal named Letha Slaughter. Slaughter looked out for the kids, and she protected them. She, like many African-American educators, ensured that her kids got the best education that they could find. These kids went on to win national awards, win major awards, including, they're just a ton, attended major universities, earned doctorates and law degrees, and they came to shape the city of Phoenix around them. I love this story. This is Gloria. In Nelson's neighborhood lived a girl named Gloria. When Gloria was in high school, she just tried many times to get into Tempe High. Her house, after all, was in Tempe and on the bus route. So multiple times, Gloria and a friend or two boarded the Tempe school bus and rode to the nearby Tempe High School. And each time they were turned away. Instead, they enrolled at South Mountain High, which opened in 1956. Every single morning, Gloria and her friends passed under the Confederate flag, which hung just below the Arizona state flag at their high school. That's because the mascot was the Rebel, a stars and bars wielding Southern soldier. Girls like Gloria were not allowed to play tennis, but every year Gloria tried to enroll in a class that taught tennis, and every year she got a phone call from the front office telling her schedule had been changed. She couldn't take that PE class. Gloria, Nelson, and their Okemah friends bummed rides, rode the city bus, or often walked from South Mountain High School on 7th Street and 7th Avenue, all the way to Broadway Road on to their homes on 40th Street, several miles a day. So what happened to Okemah? What was that third physiographic or geographic feature that separates the haves from the have-nots? Highways with a side of airport expansion. Very good. In the early 1960s, the city condemned and demolished the Mitchell House. Plans for Interstate 10's Broadway curve went right through the Mitchell property. Broadway curve construction decimated Okemah beginning in 1971. It cut through the heart of the community. The Durango curve, just a few miles west, did the exact same thing to 3 Hispanic barrios. Those communities had been around for over 100 years. Okemah became unrecognizable. What the freeway didn't take, the industry did. The city didn't protect this agricultural residential area from industrial development. History repeated itself. They left it zoned for mixed use, and its proximity to the freeway made it attractive for warehouses and distribution yards and factories. Today, there are a few original structures still standing and a couple of houses behind chain link fence. But if you go slow on 40th Street, you can catch a glimpse of the old baptismal canal where they used to do baptisms and worship, but you'll probably get honked at. After World War II, more African Americans moved to Phoenix. Many had GI Bill funding, but couldn't buy houses anywhere and didn't want a homestead. Frankly, new housing developments were for whites only, so they could wait for a home to open in Eastlake, or they could get creative. Travis Williams got creative. With members of his family, he founded the Progressive Builders Association, PBA, in 1945. It was the first Black-owned construction company in Arizona, and they built homes, beautiful homes for aspirational and middle-class Black families. They headquartered along Broadway Road in the Hartco Plaza with Sun Valley Life Insurance. Now, Sun Valley was started by Goldie Hart and her husband, and it was the first Black-owned insurance company in Arizona. And Goldie was a teacher in the Roosevelt schools. She's remembered for being the first Black woman principal in the Roosevelt School District. But we now know that she was preceded by Letha Slaughter by several decades. But that's okay. We go ahead and we enjoy all the achievements around here. And speaking of achievements, PBA ensured that South Phoenix stood in stark contrast to declining Black homeownership in the American West. In 1961, the Phoenix Urban League found that of the 31,000 newly constructed homes that they surveyed only north of the river, not one was sold to a Black family. But on the South Side, Black homeownership was on the rise. This is bucking national trends. Some of the most famous Black Phoenicians lived in PBA neighborhoods. You know their names: Helen K. Mason, Bernard Black, Juanita and Clovis Campbell, and Louis Jordan. When Jordan, a musician and activist who helped desegregate Sky Harbor Airport, moved away, he sold his property at 2118 East Violet. The lot was eventually combined with 3 others to form the Nation of Islam compound. Elijah Muhammad lived there part-time, and the property was visited many times by Black activists, including Malcolm X. And today, the property remains under the guard of the Nation of Islam. Just down the street from that property is Julian Elementary, and I want to talk to you a little bit about schools in these neighborhoods that were sites of resistance and community control. Black parents ensured that their schools hired Black educators who were elite and well-educated. They also named campuses for African-American icons. Percy L. Julian, as you see here, which is just across the street from that compound I showed you, opened in 1948. It was named for the grandson of enslaved people and a chemist from Montgomery, Alabama. Julian didn't live anywhere near Phoenix, but he paid for the school's landscaping. Palmdale Elementary opened in 1966 on Weir and 32nd Street. That's just south of Broadway for the uninitiated. Palmdale, with its red brick buildings and sprawling courtyards, was beautiful, but it lacked amenities. With no cafeteria, RSD had to deliver lunches from another school, or students brought lunches, or there was a couple across the street that cooked for the kids. It was later named George Brooks Academy, and you mentioned the Reverend, after Reverend George Brooks, the activist who brokered the merger of 2 Phoenix NAACP chapters, among many other impressive feats. We are still working on this one, so if there's anyone in the room who knows about it, please come talk to me. When PBA's Sheridan Park community opened in 1965, kids crossed 24th Street to go to Palmdale, or they attended this little neighborhood school named Sheridan Park Elementary. We know that there's a connection here. When the state refused to ratify the national MLK holiday, Black parents rallied and they sought to rename Sheridan Park Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School. sometime around 1971 or 72. But the other thing we're looking for is confirmation that the King's School mascot, which is the monarch, might be a nod to Carver High School's mascot, which is also the monarch, but one is a butterfly and one is a lion. So if you know anything, please come see me. Palmdale, Julian, and King's School are icons in the South Phoenix community, but their stories remain undertold. There's, of course, an interracial coalition of parents, community members, and students who fought back on the negative media coverage that Arturo was discussing, which has been happening for decades. You might recognize some of these names: Verna McLean, Merle Morris, Russell Jackson, George Brooks, Bernard Black. The first thing they did was join the charge to change that South Mountain High mascot from Rebel to Jaguar. They approached Dr. Josephine Pete, the first Black woman principal at South. The mascot was personal for Josie, too. She grew up in Okemah and attended South with Gloria Nelson and walked under the Confederate flag every single morning. Next, they launched the Pride of South Phoenix Festival that boasted annual parades and fashion shows, hay rides, pioneer breakfasts, dances, and a Miss South Phoenix pageant. This celebration of South Phoenix community went on for decades. Finally, they turned their sights to higher education. Their ask was easy. They wanted a community college in South Phoenix, but they were told in more ways than one over the course of years that the people were happy down there. They didn't need a college in South Phoenix. That's a direct quote. It took them years, but when South Mountain Community College officially opened in 1981, it boasted the perfect kind of racial makeup that seems almost impossible today. 30% Black, 30% Hispanic, 30% white. All representational in South Phoenix. So let's take a pause. By studying South Phoenix, we're learning about Black homesteading in the early 20th century, Black innovators and pioneers in the American West, community developers, self-reliance, civil rights, pre- and post-war housing, schools as sites of community control and resistance. And listen, the speech could go on forever. There's so much more. I haven't even mentioned the 70 plus churches in South Phoenix. So where is South Phoenix? Is it south of Washington, the tracks, the river? Does Tempe count? What about Levine? And why not South Mountain Village? Why not? What is that? My question for the last several years has not just been where is South Phoenix in geography, it's where is South Phoenix in historiography? And I'll explain about that by telling you how we got started with this research in the first place. This is a symposium on the future and the past of student coalitions. And so what a great example to give you. In 2017, I was teaching a class called Arizona History. This isn't the class, this is last year's class, but this one was a small group, 12 students. Ages ranged from 16 to 65, a mixture of men, women, and one student who did not identify: white, Black, Hispanic. Every single one of them lived in one of the 6 zip codes surrounding our college, South Mountain Community College. I thought it would be fun to do a class research project together. I said, hey, let's pick a topic. You all pick the topic and I'll teach you how to research. It just has to be about Arizona. They chose South Phoenix. Historians, how do you start research? There are 2 kinds of sources we need. What are they typically? Primary, secondary sources. Booyah, that's where we started. I said, let's get started with secondary sources. Let's consult books or articles or documentaries or websites, anything already about South Phoenix. We looked into anything that was somewhat relevant. We looked at Luckingham, Whitaker, Melcher, Ross, and just a few others who've published on general Phoenix history that might nod to South Phoenix's interracial history. We reached out to our own librarians and librarians across the state archives, ASU. I'm sure I emailed Nancy somewhere. I'm positive I emailed you, Nancy, and the Salt River Project. How do you think we did in those first 2 weeks? How do you think it went? It did not look good. What we ended up with were a lot of stories, anecdotes, dozens, hundreds of photos of the Japanese flower gardens, and a lot of dead ends. I received at least 6 apologetic emails from librarians. The problem was, and my students knew this better than me, the problem was the history was out there. It was right up the street. Palmdale is less than, 2 miles from the college where we were sitting. The history of Black and Hispanic South Phoenix is literally woven into the walls of South Mountain Community College where we were sitting, but there wasn't a narrative to start with. We were in a vacuum. I told them, I lost it. There we go. We cannot do this. I cannot ethically expect you to do anything about this. This is a community college class and we have 12 weeks left. What we are talking about is professional graduate research that needs to be done over the course of like decades. Let's pick another topic. How about baseball in Arizona? This is a true story. That's what I said to my students. How about baseball in Arizona? 12 very confused and irritated faces looked back at me. I did not expect it. I thought they'd be like, oh, thank goodness. No, they were like, what? And one of the students said to me, Dr. C, if we don't do this, who will? So we launched the South Phoenix Oral History Project. Those 12 students developed the mission, a student-led initiative to capture and preserve the history of South Phoenix. They created a research plan, interviewed anyone they could think of, designed our ideal website, this is what it looks like, and put in motion what is now a massive digital and physical collection of history pertaining to South Phoenix. Over 350 students and 200 narrators have been involved. We'd love to interview anyone you know. Truly, bring them all. We'll do it. And here's what we've produced. So big breath. Here we go. A documentary about the history of South Mountain Community College, 2 peer-reviewed journal articles, 2 manuscripts currently in process, several multimedia pieces, a walking tour, a driving tour, a special collection archive in the South Mountain Community Library, a community survey called Where is South Phoenix? And the work continues. Last week, I toured a converted classroom at George Brooks Academy, formerly Palmdale. When the door was open, I was very dramatic. I stopped in my tracks. This classroom. Has anyone been in this room? You know what I'm talking about? Some people are like, I've been there.
I saw pictures of it recently and I was floored by what I saw.
Unbelievable.
I was floored.
It was amazing. I'm so glad you know what I'm talking about. I stopped in my tracks. This classroom, which has sat empty since 2021, was lined literally from floor to ceiling with local and representational Black history, art, and literature. Lovingly curated displays of Black created literature and art were everywhere, but most impressively, dozens, and I mean dozens of classroom photos. You know, the kinds like 3 rows of kids, teachers on either side holding a placard telling you the year, lined the room. These were photos of Palmdale, Julian, and King from the 1960s on. Almost every face was African American. I recognized a few: Josie Pete, Goldie Hart, Mrs. White, different Mrs. White. But for the most part, these were unnamed African American kids who once made up the heart of the South Side. What happened to these Black Phoenicians? Where are they now? How did this room become, well, this room? This recommissioned classroom was once the meeting and display space of James Eugene Brooks, who went by the pen name Jimmy James. He was an activist, educator, and artist. He lived in South Phoenix his whole life, from what I understand. And when COVID took him in 2021, he left behind this trove of local and representational Black history. He also left original artwork, personal documents, and the ashes of an unknown family member, we think. A few minutes later, Dr. George Brooks Jr., the son of the Reverend, for whom the former school is now named, walked in the classroom. He just happened to be visiting the school for a different reason and heard there were some researchers in the Jim Brooks no relation room. George and I walked out together, me bothering him with questions about his aquaponics practice and his dad, and him asking me how South Mountain Community College can continue to support the preservation of Black history. We could have stood and chatted in that brutal sun for hours. But the assistant superintendent had another appointment at the Roosevelt School District office, and so she shooed us to our cars. And as she did, she mentioned that RSD is anxious to return or offload all of these materials. That's why she called me. Does SMCC want it? Do you guys want to take over the $1,500 monthly lease? Is there some local museum or historical society that cares about South Phoenix history that would want this? And if not, do I know anyone from Jimmy's family to, quote, take this stuff? There is more to do if we really want to reclaim Black Arizona history. I made one phone call that morning, and I found out Brooks's son works across the street from the Roosevelt School District. The assistant superintendent probably sees his workplace every day she walks into her own workplace. South Phoenix is a small town. Alex Haley said in 1973 that it is the wrinkled, graying ancestors, friends of our grandmothers, who hold the history. In recliners and at kitchen tables, grandparents, tias, and neighbors of my students, those first 12 and the 350 cents, hold the key to solving what Haley calls history written by the winners, messed up from the very beginning. I know every one of these stories I told you today because my students researched them, primarily through interviews with people they already know, might stand behind in line at Starbucks or honk out on 40th Street. This is what makes oral history and local history so important. This is why we're here today. We see in real time the significance of our research. These are students, community college students from some of the most disenfranchised neighborhoods of the city by design from the moment the city was founded, who are doing professional level research on their community. What an incredible teaching tool we have at our disposal. Think about the kind of confidence this might inspire in a student. Think about the value they might see in their own potential as a result of just interviewing their grandpa. It's good stuff. You can't plagiarize an interview. Chat GPT, AI, it's not going to solve a historical narrative with major gaps in it. If we don't do it, who will? And like I tell everyone I talk to, if you want to know anything about Phoenix history, you've got to come south. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Arturo, for this amazing breakdown of South Phoenix and the important history of South Phoenix and what that means for understanding, especially just Phoenix history in general, but also the Black and African American history of this particular town. And so we do have a few moments. Does anybody have any questions for Arturo or for Summer regarding the presentations that they provided? Oh, excellent. I'll walk up to you. Hold on a second. It's so fun to get like hear somebody else about the same stuff.
I'm just wondering, can we access the product? You said that there was like, can we access that from South Mountain's website?
You can go to southphoenixoralhistory.com
Okay.
and you can find everything. Links to all the interviews we've done, stories that students write about the narrators, links to our driving tour and our walking tour. And you can always contact me because this is like my joke is when people are like, are you still studying South Phoenix? I'm often like, you're gonna have to pry this from my cold, dead hands. Like this is all we do. So happily, please do reach out to us. And I have my card as well.
Anybody else? Excellent.
Have you been able to, either of you, both of you, able to take your work into the schools in South Phoenix?
I haven't.
Yeah, Arturo, I don't think you have. You've started mostly with interviewing elders, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we got started with our King School research because the principal of King School can't find their history. There was a fire at the Roosevelt School District. King School has been closed off and on over the years. And so she actually reached out to us. So we do work with the schools as much as we can, but we would happily do more.
Oh, my question was more along the lines of, you've been able to tell any of the high school students or the middle school students that this history is being researched and available to them to learn about now?
Yeah. Should we take it on the road? You and me? Let's do it. We'll do it.
Good.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Anybody else have a question for? Oop, I see a hand. I see a hand.
Hey, good morning. Thank you guys so much for sharing everything. I'm originally from Chihuahua, but South Phoenix is actually my first stomping grounds when my mom and I crossed the border. So hearing everything about it is really eye-opening and how would you say it resonates. But one of the questions that I had was how were you guys finding people that you were interviewing? Like, how did you guys get started with that process?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I did the interview with Pastor Stewart, and I felt like a part of being a scholar is helping to get back to the community. So getting involved. And then I went to a FIBCO Family Services Inc. So it's Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They're associated with the church. They give out food, they give out clothes. And I went to volunteer, and that's where I met Bill Smith, Darnell, and Jake Sells. Yeah.
How many of you out here are graduate students? Are there any? So when I was a graduate student, I was like, if I could only find like a community that story hasn't been told, I could maybe really, it's be careful what you wish for, because as soon as you start, it's like you can't stop. So really for us, it was word of mouth. When we started with those first 12, they really just interviewed anyone they could reach out to. But over time, if you look at our website, we have, 200 names listed. Now, when we tell people, oh, we've interviewed her, we've interviewed him, like we've now got such a collection that people like Gary Walters call us. Like, I want to be interviewed. I grew up in South Phoenix. So some of it is just building on your own momentum over time. And a lot of it is contacts, people reaching out to you.
All right, we are very close and at time. So again, I want to thank Summer and Arturo for this particular presentation. Hopefully y'all will stick around at least for a little bit if anybody has any other questions. But in general, appreciate both of you and appreciate the history that you brought here today about South Phoenix. Very excited to dig into more of that. So thank you all very much. And we'll go
Thank
ahead
you,
and
Jessica.
get started and transition to our keynote, which will be in a few minutes. Thank you. Picture?
Yeah, yeah.